The Canon R6 Mark II is one of the most nuanced portrait cameras I've used in recent years, and I've been using this camera for now 2.5 years as a full-time portrait photographer. Its configuration options, when approached with the right photographic mindset, can make or break a shot. But I feel like it can be a bit intense to get into some of the more nuanced settings when starting out with this camera. So if you're an R6 Mark II shooter, or use other Canon cameras where a lot of what I'm going to show you here will apply, then this deep dive will show you everything I have learned and everything I use as a working portrait photographer to get the most out of this camera. So let's jump in. I want to start off by specifying that we will not be getting into video settings in this video, though I will be doing a separate video where I talk about cinematography and videography settings for this camera, as it is a phenomenal hybrid shooter. In today's video, we're going to be focusing primarily on portrait photography, which may include in some cases weddings or events. But if people, groups of people, individuals, couples, kids, if that is the primary focus of your photography with this camera, then the settings that I'm going to show you today are what I have used as a working portrait photographer shooting people. But as a portrait photographer, the R6 Mark II delivers customization and flexibility when you take the time to set it up right. The aim of this deep dive is going to equip you with the grounded, practical setup that you're going to need so that you can trust your camera to deliver quick, reliable, and high quality stills. While I'm going to talk about related gear throughout, our focus is not on specs or speeds or feeds, but on the technical configuration and not just headline specs or features. And the advice that I'm going to give is shaped specifically for working professionals and advanced prosumers who care about consistent output and workflow efficiency. So let's move into the nuts and bolts of this camera and start talking about shooting settings on the R6 Mark II, talking about formats and color. Now I have my R6 Mark II right here and I am recording the screen output, so I will put that on the screen for you to see as we go through each of these menus. Again, if you're shooting with the R6 Mark II or another similar Canon camera and you want to pull up these settings with me, let's do it together. When you open up the menu settings in the R6 Mark II, or really any Canon camera, the first tab that you're going to see is the shooting tab. It's the red one with the icon that looks like a camera. And while I'm not going to dive into every single setting that this camera has, I'm going to get into a few of these rather deeply. And one of them is image format or image quality. We're going to click on that button. We're going to go into the different options. Now this is a 24 megapixel camera. You can see that at the top, 24 600 by 4000 or 6000 by 4000 rather. And you've got options for RAW and JPEG or HEIF or high efficiency image format. RAW gives you the option of no RAW, that's what the line means, RAW, and CRAW or compressed RAW. I've heard that called Canon RAW. I'm pretty sure it's just compressed RAW. And then you have your various resolution differences for your JPEGs. I'm not even going to get into those. To be quite honest, the difference between RAW and compressed RAW is that the compressed RAW has compression applied. And for portraiture, specifically for families, couples, groups, kids, I have not noticed any difference between RAW and CRAW. Now, if you go into forums, you get deep into Reddit, I'm sure that there are folks who have been able to find very specific differences in the pixel by pixel composition of these different formats. But here's what I can tell you. When you're delivering for a client as a professional, speed is key. And if you're dealing with image formats or image files that are half the size and yet still develop 99% or 99.9% of the quality, you're gonna do just fine with compressed RAW. So the first setting that I keep is compressed RAW, and I do not use a JPEG option. Some folks use those as sidecars or additional secondary images. I don't. I only shoot in RAW and I only shoot in compressed RAW when doing portraits. The next two settings that you'll see in this tab are the dual pixel RAW and the cropping or aspect ratio options. I skip both of these. Dual pixel RAW allows you later on, using Canon specific software, to make fine-tuned micro adjustments in the focus of your image. It is not worth it, in my opinion, especially if you're shooting, again, outdoors, if you're shooting portraits of families, there's gonna be motion, there's gonna be lots of shots. Maybe if you're shooting product or if you're shooting in a very controlled studio environment, that might make sense, but these image files are gonna get gigantic if you do it this way. And again, delivery is key. Also, don't crop in camera. Don't do that. That's crop afterwards. You're going to be fine. Next is your exposure compensation or exposure bracketing. Again, I leave this stock. My ISO speed settings, what I will do traditionally, because I do sometimes shoot in auto ISO, is I will set my range to probably about 12,800, maybe 6,400, and really not any higher than that. If you're going higher than that, you need to bring in extra light. The R6 Mark II shoots phenomenally at 6,400. I literally shot at 12,800 in both stills and video yesterday in a very dark environment at the Shark Aquarium, the Shark Tank. We have a aquarium here in Vegas. It's at the Mandalay Bay Hotel and Casino, and it's shark themed and it's very dark. And I was shooting at 12,800 on the R6 Mark II. Those images came out beautifully. I also set my minimum shutter speed to 1/250th. I've had some people I've seen indicate that like 1/125th is enough, or 1/160. Human beings have a tendency to move just a little bit, just micro changes and adjustments. You don't want to miss that little bit of eye movement, you know, that little bit of sway, they breathe. I would recommend 1/250th to eliminate all of those. And if you're going to be shooting kids, 1/1000. Kids move fast. I do not use the HDR shooting modes or the auto light optimizer or the highlight tone priority. A lot of that is specific to JPEG shooting. You should not be shooting in JPEG if you're a professional, or if you are just looking to get the most out of your camera. Shoot in RAW. You're going to get the best quality images if you're shooting in RAW. Moving over to the fourth tab under shooting, again, if you're shooting in RAW, your white balance doesn't actually matter. You're going to be able to set your white balance afterwards. Now, having good white balance is important, especially when you're looking through the viewfinder or through the screen. So I keep this at auto, knowing that I can change it later. The other thing that I don't mess with really is my picture style. I keep it on neutral or faithful, and in some cases, if you want something that's specific to the look you know you're going to be getting at the end, create a custom one. But also know that while Lightroom and other external editors will in some cases carry those settings over, it's a raw image. You don't have to keep any of that. You can ditch it. It's not baked into your image. Same goes for clarity. It's not going to affect your raw images, as well as creative filters. You're going to be shooting raw. You're not going to use any of that stuff. On the color space side, I've actually had folks at Canon tell me to switch it to Adobe RGB or Adobe Photo Color. I keep an sRGB. I find that that color space is fine. And if you're delivering for the web, which most people are going to be delivering now, sRGB is standard. Don't add additional steps in your workflow. That way you can deliver quality images to your clients as quickly as possible. One thing that was added in some recent firmware updates for Canon cameras is in this lens aberration correction or lens correction menu. And that was peripheral illumination correction. Now, right now I have the RF 14 to 35 f4 on this camera, but a lot of times I'll shoot with other lenses. Some lenses are supported, some are not. What I've also found though is that if you turn it on, especially if you're using video, it'll have a tendency to over brighten in some cases the edges of your screen or the edges of your shot. And so I will say that while this is a good setting to turn on in most cases, I would strongly recommend that you test out on or off depending on your lens. Or if you just have a traditionally more contrasty scene, it may overexpose or over brighten those areas in an attempt to correct vignetting or what it thinks is vignetting that isn't actually there, and then you're going to get noisier parts of your image. When it comes to drive modes, again, for portrait photography, you could stay on single if you're very confident in both your subject and your framing and composition skills. I am not any of those, so I traditionally stay on low continuous. I don't need more than 4 or 5 shots per second normally. I don't need to burst 12 frames per second in mechanical. I definitely don't need the 30 or 40 frames per second that you can get out of a modern electronic shutter camera for portraiture. I don't want to cull 3,000 photos for a family portrait session. I like to keep my numbers under 1,000, really. So I'll make sure that I'm in low continuous and I've never missed a shot. On the question of shutter mode, specifically mechanical versus first curtain versus full electronic, really, that's in some cases a personal choice. I like shooting in mechanical, especially if I'm shooting indoors, because then I pretty much avoid most banding or flickering issues with lights I can't control. If I'm shooting outdoors, I don't have a problem shooting electronic, but you could shoot a mechanical and it really wouldn't make that big of a difference. But a couple things to note are that if you're shooting an electronic, you will introduce, especially on the R6 Mark II, though improved over the R6, some jelly rolling shutter effect if you have fast moving subjects. So again, if we're talking about kids, if you're shooting dogs or animals or anybody moving around really quickly and you're shooting at a high frame rate, like 1/2000, 1/4000, and you want to freeze that action, just know that if you're doing that and you have electronic shutter turned on, you may get a bit of a rolling shutter effect, which can smear some of your image. Switching to mechanical will avoid that. On the same end though, switching to electronic saves your mechanical shutter. There's only so many actuations that you get out of these cameras. And if you switch to electronic, you will kind of save that by just a little bit. One thing to note in the R6 Mark II, though again, kind of when we talk about RAW versus C-RAW, it might not matter as much. The mechanical shutter and the electronic first curtain on this camera are 14-bit RAW images. The electronic shutter is 12-bit. You do lose color information switching from mechanical to electronic on the Canon R6 Mark II. Image stabilizer mode. I keep this on pretty much all the time because, well, it has in-body image stabilization. That's part of the reason that you bought the camera. And unless you're locked off on a tripod, you want to have that. I would also use image stabilization in the lens if you have it. This lens comes with image stabilization and I have IS in the camera, so I would just keep that on all the time. I've not run into trouble. I don't traditionally use the digital IS unless I know that I'm going to be hand-holding in lower shutter speeds. But again, if you're shooting portraiture and you're shooting lower than 1/25th or even lower than 1/200th, you might start running into issues where your subjects are going to be blurred. And there's no amount of image stabilization that is going to fix that for you. That's just, they moved and you captured that movement in your shot. Other settings in the shooting menu, like touch shutter, image review, or some of the viewfinder and screen configurations, that's personal preference, really. I'm not going to tell you that one setting here is going to make or break your shot or going to make you a better photographer. Get the information on the screen that you like to use and that you need. In my opinion, there's a healthy balance there. Too much can really distract you. Too little, and you might not be using all the information possible. Personally, since I normally keep my settings relatively locked off, I don't need as much information about where things are on the camera, but I do like my basic exposure triangle figures. I like to know where I'm at with my shutter speed and with my aperture. I like to know where my ISO is. I also like my histogram, and I like my balance, or my level. Now, next, we're going to talk about the autofocus system, which in the R6 Mark II is a significant upgrade over the R5 and the R6 itself. This can be the deciding factor between missing a shot and being consistently sharp. And knowing the intricacies of this camera's specifics when it comes to autofocus can be a little tricky. There are some nuances here. So the R6 brings subject acquisition for faster detection of things like eyes, faces, bodies, and can be both reliable in unpredictable and busier movement situations. The camera also added the new AI autofocus or AI focus AF mode that can intelligently switch between single focus and continuous focus, depending on the subject that it detects. So when it comes to the different operating modes, the different shooting modes, one shot is best for static subjects, while servo AF gives you continuous focus tracking, which is ideal for most people and action photography. AI focus lets the camera kind of decide which is most appropriate. Personally, I keep the camera in servo AF. But first, I want to talk to you about AF acquisition, or how you acquire your subject to track. Because while it will automatically detect people, they might not always be the people that you want to photograph, or they might not be the people that you want to be most in focus, depending on the type of shot that you're putting together. And that's where your focus points come in. And personally, I prefer the expanded AF area. It gives you the ability to fine-tune and kind of pinpoint into a specific zone. It's not as big as a full zone, but it's not as small as an individual point or spot. And this setting becomes really important when you start looking at the next option, which is your whole area tracking servo AF. So what this setting does is, and I'm going to demonstrate using one of my kids' toys here. We're gonna pull Bronte in to help us out with this particular part. Is that if you've got a single point here, it's going to focus on what you point that area at, right? That it has identified the area that I want to focus on, which is this guy's face. And notice it switched from the green square to the blue square automatically, which means that it switched from single to servo using that AI focus. But it used my selection as the starting point. So I can be over here and I can say, okay, I'm gonna I'm going to select this guy's face here, and now I'm going to move my view. Or if my subject were to move, and it's going to stay locked on. Now, if I had had that setting turned off and I did the same thing, it's going to stay locked on to him as long as he remains in the area that I've selected. And if I come off of that area, boom, I'm no longer looking at him. It's going to lose him. And that's the same depending or regardless on which type of spot you use. So if we use a spot AF here and we go like this and we say, okay, we want to use him here, boom, we're going to be off of him. And it's going to go hunting for something else. If we set this to whole area AF, however, that's it. I don't have a focus point. We're just trusting the camera to do all the work. I like having control, but I like having control that's a little fuzzy. So it doesn't have to be super pinpoint control. I trust the camera to a certain amount. I trust that I'm going to pick the spot I want to focus on, and I trust the camera to stay on it. So I'm going to trust the camera once I select the initial focus point to grab that point and hold on to it, even if I or it moves from the frame. So we've got him there. We're going to move away. It switched automatically to AI focus. And even though it's not near where I was before, it knows what we want to be looking at. And then boom, I'm going to take my shot. Now, in terms of subject detection and what you should have set up for that, people. You should set it for people. If you're shooting people, you should set it for people. And again, if you're shooting groups of people, or if you're shooting families or couples, even individuals and kids, I kind of set the eye to auto. I don't really care if it's left or right. If I was doing some very set portraiture, or if I was in a studio and I had a subject that was turned a certain way and I really wanted to focus on a certain eye, you could absolutely do that. I also keep my tracked subject switching to the medium control. I've not found that it jumps around much. I just kind of keep it right there in the middle. But again, depending on the subjects that you're shooting, if you find that that's been an issue, you can always tweak that. Next, when we talk about autofocus on the R6 Mark II, we see that it has inherited the focus case scenarios. This is something that we don't have on the R5. It's something we didn't have on the R6 Mark I. It's a great advancement on the R6 Mark II. It's machine learning based tracking. But again, when you're shooting people, when you're shooting portraiture, families, things like that, traditionally I find myself either in case 1, which is just kind of an all-purpose setting, or I set it to automatic. And honestly, it does really, really well. If you know you're going to be shooting a very particular type of shot, or if you know that you're going to be shooting someone moving in and out of an environment, then go ahead and switch cases. But in most cases, case 1 and the auto are going to work fine for you. We'll pull a Forky in as just another example here. So if I want Forky as my main subject here, even if I move my camera around, he should maintain that lock. Now, if I move him partially out of frame, it's going to switch. It's not that it's never switching. It's just that it's going to try to stick to what I'm looking at unless it leaves the frame or gets close to the edge of the frame, in which case then it will switch over. Now, if we set that setting back to, never switch, only stick with the initial, really, you got to leave the whole frame for it to go looking for something else. Now, personally, I like using touch and drag, as it basically turns your rear screen into a touchpad. Now, that means you have to be looking through the viewfinder. I know a lot of modern photographers are not using the viewfinder. They're looking directly through the screen, in which case you're kind of doing that anyway. But I actually do like the idea of having the camera up to my view and being able to move using my thumb on the screen. The other setting in the autofocus settings that I really like to keep just right where they are, again, this is about portraiture. You're going to be doing lots of shooting, especially if you're coming into the busy season that we're about to this year. You want repeatability, stability, and speed. So the orientation linked AF spot means that if you have your camera this way and you turn it this way, you don't actually want the autofocus point to change. You want to keep it right there. So if you've got your autofocus point right in the middle and you flip it, you don't want it to go off to the left or the right. And so I personally like to keep those the same. I guess that's more of a preference, but from a speed and consistency standpoint, that would be my recommendation. Now that concludes the autofocus section, but there's a lot in there that you can tweak and tune specifically for your needs. But in my opinion, a lot of that is subjective and is going to be more specific to your preferences. Next, we're going to get into the settings menu. So we're going to skip ahead a couple of tabs. We're going to go to the one that looks like a gear. It's yellow or orange, depending on how you have your screen configured. Next, and this is a big one for me as a professional, right? The R6 Mark II has dual card slots. So if you go into this setting, under settings, this is tab 1, record function plus card folder selection. If we click on the selection button there, you'll see that I have my photo and video set to disable separate recording, meaning that I'm not going to have them record in different cards. I want them to record to the same card because I want everything in the same place. But I want everything in the same place because I want it twice. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to set our record option for still photos to record to multiple. And what that's going to do is it's going to record to both your first and your second card slot. Now, you need to have 2 cards and they need to be the same size for this to work. Otherwise, you're going to run out in one card and then your other card you can't use unless you put another, it's a whole thing. Have 2 fresh cards that are the same size in those 2 slots to enable this setting. I then also set my playback to that first card. That first card is going to be my primary card. That second card is, well, it's my secondary. I find that folder numbering, file naming, folder naming, those are all specific to the user. You set that up however you want, but you can create custom folders, you can set custom file names. My recommendation, if you're shooting with multiple cameras, set the file name to be the model of your camera. So I have the file name set on this one as R62_. The settings on my R5 are R51_. If I had 2 R6s, I might have R622 and R621, just so I know which cameras they're coming from. But again, that's up to you. Next, turn off your beep. That's all I can say, just turn off your beep. When you get into tab 4, which is on the R6 Mark II, where you would configure your viewfinder and your screen, these settings are really for the individual. If you prefer something brighter, if you prefer something to be warmer or cooler, just know that these are all options that you can configure in the camera. But also know that if you're shooting RAW, none of this will matter when you look at the final photos. But if you're noticing that your photos don't look like what you're seeing in the camera, this would be the first place to look. Because if you're shooting in, say, a sunny environment, but everything looks really warm or kind of dark, and then you look at the after effect and it's all very bright and very cool, that is likely an issue with the reality of the scene not matching what you're getting in the camera. But if you're shooting in RAW, you can tweak all that. Just know that if you're using your histogram and your exposure meter, your brightness isn't really going to matter either. You could even get away with not using exposure simulation if you know how to read your histogram and you know how to use your exposure meter. Next, and this is getting into some more advanced settings, so not everyone has to do this, but we're going to talk a little bit about shooting modes in a second. But before we do that, I want to let you know that your camera does have multiple custom modes that you can configure in both photo and video on the R6 Mark II. This was a big advancement over the R6. On the R6, you couldn't configure them independently of photo and video mode, and you can on the R6 Mark II. So if you have specific types of shooting styles or settings that you like to impart into a particular, boom, you want to be able to pick up your camera and not have to dial anything. You know exactly where you want to be. You want to have that minimum set at 1/250th. You want to have that maximum set at 1/8000th. You want to be on mechanical shutter because you know you're going to be indoors. You want to let your ISO float. You want to set your white balance to auto, like all of those types of things that we've discussed here. Set all that in your M or manual mode and then save it to your custom shooting mode, 1, 2, or 3. And then if you know that you're going to be going outside, you want to be shooting kids, they're going to be super fast, you're going to switch to electronic shutter, you want 1/1000th as your minimum, you want to switch it from low continuous or single shot to high continuous plus, and you want just burst all the way, you can do that and then just switch it to C2. Now that gets me to shooting modes. We're going to get into the advanced configuration or the CFN or configuration tab next. But before we do that, I just want to mention, you really should be shooting in manual. Always shoot in manual, know the exposure triangle, understand how shutter speed and aperture and ISO, how all of those things work together to create the exposure that you're seeing. understand your metering modes, understand your focus points, understand the depth of focus that you get in different areas. And then once you have all of that, once you feel confident in all of that, make things a little easier for yourself and use some of the other modes that your camera has. And I'm not talking about scene mode or any of the picture profile weird, like any of the little icon-y one, like don't do that. Don't use automatic. But I'll tell you now, I have been known to switch into aperture priority, set my ISO to float, knowing that I have locked in my shutter speed between 1/250th and 1/8000th, that I'm in either mechanical or electronic, depending on the environment that I'm in, and that I've limited my maximum ISO to about 12,800. So that if I'm in a darker environment, I know it's going to go down to 1/250th, it's going to go up to to 6400 or 12,800 if it absolutely has to, and that then I can control my aperture based on what I'm shooting, not just the light that I need. Because remember, even though we might say, okay, I need to be shooting at f1.4 because I'm shooting in the dark, or I just want that creamy out of focus look, that's awesome for solo portraits. The minute that you have a couple, you need to be shooting at f2, 2.2, 2.8, 3.5, depending on how far away from you they are and what focal length you're using and all that. But know that if your focus plane is very thin in a wide aperture environment or a wide aperture setting, you're not going to capture your entire subject. So you need to stop down a little bit. And that really is the main thing that I control, is that I know if, okay, I'm going from a solo, I've got just a teenage kid and I'm doing a solo shot for them. Now we're going to switch to mom and dad. I'm going to go from 1.8, 1.14 to 2.2, 2.8. Okay, now we're going to bring the whole group together. We got the whole family. The dog's going crazy. We got this kid jumping up and down. We're going to shoot at f4, right? I'm going to be far away. I've got a longer lens. I'm going to shoot at 5.6. I've got a great background. There's a vista of mountains behind them. I'm going to shoot at f8. But I know that I'm going to be down to 1/250th at the minimum, and I'll keep an eye on my ISO to make sure that it doesn't jack it up too high. And I only do that because I feel comfortable with the exposure triangle and it's making many of the same decisions that I would. And then I save all of that into another custom shooting mode. So my C3 is my aperture priority mode, where I have all those things locked in. The other thing to note is that this camera will blink at you if it can't get things down low enough. So if the shutter speed is too fast still and it can't hit the exposure in the middle, it's going to blink at you, so you'll know. And then there's going to be something else you're going to need to play with. So next, let's talk about the custom function or configuration mode. Again, not going into every single setting here. There's a lot in here, including button customization. I'm going to level with you. I don't really customize my buttons all that much for photos. I do for video, right? That's a different thing. But for photos, and I don't use back button focusing. I half press the shutter. That's how I focus. That's how I learned. It works fine for me. It's great. If you love a back button focus, go for it. For me, that's just, I have to squeeze the camera. But the things that I do go in here and change, specifically, I'll go into my ISO speed requirements. And I mentioned that in some cases, I will let my ISO float in auto because I trust this camera. And even at high ISOs, it still looks very good. But what I'll do is I'll actually change this from half or third stop increments to full stop ISO increments. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but here's why. Canon cameras, for some reason, at different stop increments have a tendency to get very noisy, at least in my experience. So at 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, they look phenomenal. But 5000 actually looks noisier to me than 6400. I'd rather shoot at 3200 than 2500. I'd rather shoot at 1600 than 1200. And as long as you're not clipping your highlights, which Canon cameras are actually very good at retaining highlight detail, not as good at retaining noise in the low shadows, but I bust that up just a little bit, maybe then stop down by a third of a stop, right? That's a physical change. And in that case, you're actually even going to get a sharper image, but that is one change that I like to make. And really in this settings mode, that's it. Those are the settings that I adjust from stock. These cameras work really well out of the box. There's not a ton that you have to do, but these changes, and specifically understanding how the exposure triangle works and understanding how the different focus modes work on these cameras can help quite a bit. The other thing that I want to mention on my camera, and specifically the R6, and I do this for the R5 as well, is that when I'm doing portrait shooting, I do shoot with a grip. And there's two reasons for that, right? We talked about vertical versus horizontal shooting. So if you're shooting like this, and you go to shoot horizontally, or wait, no, you go to switch to shoot vertically, you're gonna go like this, right? And I'm old, right? I'm more than 40, and I've got toddlers, so my shoulders hurt. And if you notice this move, see how my elbow's coming up here to do this, okay? Could I do it like that? Yes. Does that feel weird? Yes. So now if I do this, I start to feel strain in my shoulder. And if I'm doing this all day long, because you will go from this to this, that hurts. It hurts, and at the end of the day, you're just like, oh. Get in the car and you're like, why does my shoulder hurt? I don't understand. That's why. So I use a grip. Boom. Now I'm shooting the same way. Going like this, no problem. But this grip has all of the buttons, right? So I have my shutter button, I have my function button, I have all of my dials on the front and the back. I've even got my little multifunction joystick back here. The one from Canon for the R5 and the R6 Mark II, I think is $375. For a camera that you can right now get for under $2,000, that felt excessive to me. So I invested in the newer version. And this is the newer replacement for the BG R10. I got this like on Prime Day for under $100. I think it's normally about $100, $130. So it's more than half. It's actually like a third of the cost of the Canon version. It seems to be exactly the same. It functions normally. I've had no issues with it. And it gives you not just the ability to switch back and forth, but it gives you multiple batteries. So again, if you are a pro portrait shooter and you are shooting multiple clients in a day, like I do, where I'll shoot, I don't know, a half dozen people in the afternoon, having this is huge. That's the first thing that I mentioned. The second thing that I like to mention is that I like to shoot with filters. We were talking about highlight tone priority and exposure and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of things that you can do in camera to make your photos great and to make it a lot easier on yourself as a photographer. But there are also some things that you can put on your camera that will make your life a lot easier, one of which is the grip. The second are filters. Now, you don't always need filters. You don't really need filters. But here's what I would say if you're getting into portrait photography and you're going to be using the R6 Mark II, get a circular polarizer. Now, I use K&F's magnetic filter system, and I'll put a link to that down below as well as to the grip. But I love these filters. The circular polarizer is gonna do a couple of things for you. One, it's gonna deepen some of the background, give you a little bit more contrast. But more than anything, for portrait shooting specifically, it will let you reduce the amount of glare and or shine you have on your subjects. So if you're shooting them, even in the best lighting, you might get a little bit of side light, you might get a little bit of shine right on the face. I've got a lot of chrome on the dome up here, right? I think if I shine this, I think you can see the light that I'm using right now as a rim light. Can you see it in the reflection? Yeah. If you use a circular polarizer, especially if the primary light that you're using is the sun, you can turn that to actually, well, that sounds terrible. I think I have sand in there. You can actually get that to match the angle of the light coming in and reduce that shine considerably. So reducing a little bit of that shine, reducing a little bit of that glare, making your client look better, softening their appearance, as well as softening the appearance of some of the background that you have, circular polarizer. I also, again, love the magnetic filters from K&F. Again, I'll link those down in the description if you want to take a look at them, if you're just curious. Okay, so wrapping up, the R6 Mark II is a flexible, reliable tool for demanding photographers. The real world difference doesn't just come down to specs, but how you use the AF system, the shutter types, the filters, custom profiles to support your unique workflow and style. Actual testing always trumps theoretical debates. Take these recommendations, adjust them to your needs, refine until you find the perfect set and forget setup. There are so many people out here right now on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram Reels that are like, I've got the one setting that's gonna make your shots the best. No, you know what makes your shots the best? Taking your camera out every day, testing your setup, testing your workflow, and communicating with your clients. Because honestly, even if you just use this thing right out of the box, well, not exactly, but pretty close to right out of the box, if you connect with your client, if you're able to get them to bring out that smile and feel comfortable, that will come across in the image far better than the resolution or the autofocus settings or any of that. as long as you get the shot. Now, small upgrades like the newer grip or KNF filters might seem minor, but they can save you a lot of time and hassle and make your shoot smoother in the real world. The other thing that I would recommend, and I didn't mention this in the video, are fast SD cards. I strongly recommend getting fast UHS-2 cards that make buffer clearing and file copying great. I use these Sabrent cards. They are awesome. They're inexpensive too, and I've not yet had one fail on me, whereas I have had some of the other bigger brands fail on me. Now, if you want to support what I'm doing here, you can become a channel member. Now, if you want to come out from behind the camera and book me for a photo or video session, all the details are down below, along with all of my gear lists, everything that we've talked about here, and everything that you need to get started. Now, those links do help the channel, but as always, the easiest way to support me and the channel here is to hit the like and subscribe button. It goes a long way to letting YouTube know that I'm doing the right thing. Thanks again for watching. Let me know down in the comments what's your favorite setting. What's the one setting that you always change on every camera that you get? Thanks.